welcome to Fort Lee Historic Park. We're starting our program today with a demonstration of the role of drums and fifes in the British and American armies. So we'll talk a little bit about the role and about the uniforms a little bit later. But we're going to start with the main role of drums was for signals and communication. And every British regiment had during the American Revolution period in America, had 2 drummers per company, 10 companies in a regiment, and they had 2 fifers in the Grenadier Company, but the captains in the other battalion companies often supplemented with additional fifers. In the American Army, they had usually 1 drum and 1 fife per company of men. And again, same thing, 10 companies. So in a regiment, you might see somewhere around 20 drums and fifes. Their main role, as I mentioned, was communications. One of the communications they would do would be their camp duties. These are the daily regimen that would help regulate a soldier's day, from sunrise to evening to when they had to go to bed. The very first duty would be the reveille. And particularly at the beginning of the war, the Americans used the same signals and the same drum beatings and fife tunes as the British. And of course, you can understand that because America was a colony of Britain. That was their culture. That was what they were familiar with. So the first one we're going to play is called the English Reveille. This typically would be played at sunrise in camp or in garrison. And the goal was to waken the men and for the guards to cease challenging. English Reveille. Imagine having the drums and fifes marching in the company streets between the tents, marching throughout the camp with more than 2 drummers, probably 10 drummers. I think that might wake you up. We have a fifer that needs to be reprimanded in front of his company. Maybe we'll have him run the gauntlet unless he plays well on the fife, which I'm sure he will. The next thing you would hear by the regimental drums and fifes. Oh, by the way, I mentioned drums and fifes. The fife is a flute-like instrument, very simple, 6 holes, very shrill. This is not an instrument you would play indoors, but because it carries very well over quite a distance, it was a very good instrument in the field. And same as the snare drum. So these were the military instruments of most of the infantry of the Continental Army as well as the British Army. The next thing you would hear around 8 o'clock, the troop or assembly would be played, and the purpose of that was to inspect the men and call the rolls. So troop or assembling. assembling. It was also a type of drum beating called the singlings of the troop. Oftentimes that would be followed by the doublings of the troop. And you notice we played that more than one time. We would play it as long as necessary for the troops to assemble on the Grand Parade. And the Grand Parade was basically a field where they would do their exercises and maneuvers. During the day, well, I take it back. Later in the day, at sunset, the men would be given, they would be told they're off duty with the retreat. So the retreat melody could be used on a battlefield to signal withdrawal, or it could be used in camp at sunset to signal that the men are now off duty, except for the ones who are assigned to guards and so on and so forth. So this is the retreat. Tap two. We're not going to play it for you today, but that would be played at 8 o'clock in winter and 10 o'clock in summer to signal basically the men have to return to their tents and the sutlers are no longer to serve liquor. And that's where the name, we believe, came from. Turn the taps to. Turn the taps to. And the taps were the kegs that would have ale or beer, and the sutlers would have to close shop. And the men should not be seen until reveille in the morning. So that would be the soldier's day. So just a couple minutes on our uniforms. So one thing you're going to notice, especially when you see the rest of the soldiers, is that drummers and fifers had unique uniforms. In the British Army, and the Americans pretty much followed the same tradition, they would often, most of the time, reverse the colors. So in the British Army, a regiment would have the main red coat, a madder red coat, with a facing, which are the lapels, the collar, and the cuffs, which was a different color. So the 22nd Regiment, my regiment, wears red coats with buff facing, which is kind of like a cream colored or a light tan. The drums and fifes wear buff with red. So we're kind of like inside out from the rest of the troops. 38th Regiment. They have red coats with yellow facings. Fifer or drummer wears a yellow coat with red. 23rd Regiment is the only regiment today wearing a red coat as a fifer or drummer. That's because they are a royal regiment. So they had the privilege to continue to wear the same color coat as the soldiers, but he is distinguished by the lace on the sleeves, as we also have on the drummer. So the men-at-arms, you'll see, do not have the lace, which are the cloth that's decorating the sleeves and so on. But again, the main role was for drums to have a distinct uniform. They were the signal people. So this way an officer could pick them out very quickly. Drummers today are dressed in civilian clothing as a militia. So a militia were civilians who took up arms to defend their community or their town and so on. And they're wearing what would be civilian clothes that they wore with them from home. And we have a loyalist militia. So the American Revolution was a civil war. And we had about a third of Americans actively took up arms and fought to protect their rights as Englishmen and protect the laws and of Parliament and the King. And we have the 5th Connecticut in civilian small clothes, and he is a rebel, so to speak. But we captured him, and he's being kind enough to play drum for us today. Thank you.
For the 5th Connecticut, the unit I'd be with later in the war, we didn't do the reverse colors. We did something a little different. We still wanted to stand out, so we had a yellow coat with blue facings, even though our unit was blue coat with red facings. It would be something yellow like the 38, but with blue instead of red.
So again, and also other regiments, you would find red-coated American drummers and fifers, oftentimes if they had blue with red. And there's no cookie cutter type of rationale behind it, but they did distinguish the drums and fifes most of the time when they could with their uniform. Okay, we're gonna as I think one of the American officers said, the more pleasant part of military discipline, we're gonna play some favorite airs and marches. So during the 18th century, European armies tended to march at the ordinary step, also known as the common step. Very slow by today's standards. We would call it a slow march. And they called it the ordinary step because that's what they normally marched at. And it would be about 1 step per second or slightly faster, about 60 beats or 75 beats in a minute. That didn't mean that the song sounded slow, but you would march it slow. When they wanted to move a little faster, they have a quick step, which is about double the speed. So we're going to play a ordinary step march for you first, and then we'll go into some quick marches. The tune that we're going to play is called King Enjoys His Own. It is a very old song. It goes back to the 1600s during the English Civil War, and it became a very popular tune of the Jacobite rebels in Scotland, and eventually the English picked it up as well. It's called King Enjoys His Own. Move into some quick marches. We're doing no Scotch Grays. We'll play one more ordinary step or common step tune. This is called the Scotch Grays March. The Scotch Grays were a British regiment that were mounted on gray horses. To move things a little faster, and today during our parade later today to the city center, we're probably going to play quick marches because it's a little chilly out. We want to get there quickly. So these are going to be quick marches. First one is Welcome Here Again. march of the British and the Americans is British Grenadiers. Now you think, why would the Americans play British Grenadiers? Grenadiers were the elite company in a regiment of the British Army. And they got the name Grenadiers because early in the 18th century, they actually carried iron balls filled with powder, which we call grenades, and they would toss them at fortifications. By the American Revolution, they no longer carried grenades, but they still had the name Grenadiers. So why would Americans play that tune? They like the melody. They may have changed the words to the Liberty Song, but they still had the same melody. And that's a frequent occurrence, that the music that they were familiar with was British music. And a lot of times, if it was a song, they would change the words to reflect their new politics. British Grenadiers. Marching to that tune, it raises your spirit. In fact, it is still one of the most popular marches today in the British Army. Another tune that I'm sure you're familiar with is called Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle was a British melody that originally, in the early part of around the 1770s or so, was used to kind of make fun of the Doodles, the Americans. They were very poorly trained and so on and so forth. As I said, if you like the melody, you change the words. So the Americans eventually changed the words and took it on as their own. So Yankee Doodle was played by both British and by Americans, probably singing different lyrics. Yankee Doodle, twice through. Another tune, similar story. An American Fife major recorded this tune in his manuscript book in 1781 as the French Quick March. And we do believe it originally came from France, but the British liked it, so they called it the Casino. So we're going to play and we're going to under the title French Quick March. Next tune is an old Irish tune called The Rakes of Mallow. Again, played by both the British and the American armies. So you can see the British didn't mind where the music came from. That was an Irish tune. They had a tune, we played a French tune. And of course we played some English tunes. So again, the melody suited them and it worked to keep the men marching in step. They would adopt those tunes. Next tune is another 6/8 tune and it's called Moon and Seven Stars. 7 stars. Another 6/8, another Irish tune, Paddywhack. As I mentioned, they like music from different countries. The next tune is a Scottish tune. During the American Revolution, this might have been played more often by the Americans. It is called the White Cockade. And the cockade is the ribbon worn in the hat. So I have a black cockade, and the white cockade was a symbol of France and also of Scotland. And in Scotland, during the mid of the 18th century, there was a rebellion against the British. They were trying to restore James Stewart to the kingship of Great Britain. They lost, but the White Cockade, the music still carries on. So this is the White Cockade. Irish tune that goes back to the 17th century, and this is called Lilla Bolero. Lilla Bolero. For his final selection, I mentioned that almost all the music was played by both the British Army and the Loyalists, of course, who were Americans fighting for the crown, as well as the American Army. The next tune is a completely American composition by William Billings, and would not have been played by the British, but in tribute to our American drummer and to thank him for supporting us in our presentation, we're going to play Chester. Twice through. Gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. If you have any questions after we dismiss, we'll be happy to address them. But we bid you a very good historic day.